Well, ahead of today's very important National Cabinet meeting, we're joined now by the New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian. Premier, good morning. Thank you for your time.
That's okay, Michael. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, the Prime Minister today will be pushing the Premiers and Chief Ministers to increase the international cap again. It was halved last month, as we know. Do you support that?
Look, I support a system where every state does its fair share. New South Wales has been wearing the overwhelming burden of returning travellers. I shouldn't use the word burden because Aussies have the right to come home. We've been welcoming 3,000 every week. We did take a pause a few weeks ago to understand how the new strains of the virus were working and moving and how virulent they were and what we needed to do to make sure we had the tightest quarantine system possible. And I look forward to those conversations, and I just say to the other states it's important for all of us to do our fair share, to make sure we support returning Australians, but also that we accept and appreciate, as New South Wales has done, that the quarantine system is really the biggest risk we have from the virus. I mean, community transmission in Australia today is pretty much zero or negligible. So we know the risk comes from the quarantine system. Every time there's been an outbreak, it's been linked back in one way or another to the quarantine system. So that's all of our collective responsibility to make it as tight as possible, to make sure that if there is a case of someone acquiring the disease in that system, how we manage it, how we deal with it, and how we reduce the likelihood of any community transmission. And so we have to, New South Wales has been accepting this risk for some time now. It's been how we've worked, how we've operated, and that's why it was always bemusing to me to receive comments or, free advice from other colleagues who weren't welcoming home Australians or who weren't bringing back their share. We did it on behalf of the nation. We do it because it's the right thing to do on compassionate grounds. And imagine if you had a loved one stuck overseas, you would want them safe and back home. And we accept that, but it does come with a risk.
Rightio,
and all of us have to share the responsibility.
Okay, and based on that, I'll ask the question again. Do you agree with what Scott Morrison is pushing for that cap to be increased again, which would involve New South Wales taking more return travellers?
Well, Michael, we'll have those conversations today and in National Cabinet, and the Prime Minister and the state premiers will make our positions clear. But I do believe it's a collective responsibility on behalf of all the states, and all states have to. I mean, it's interesting. I've listened to some of the comments from my colleagues in other states, but the situation they're speaking of hasn't changed or isn't different, as in we've always tried to make the system tighter, but that level of risk from the quarantine system is always there, has always been there. And that's why when New South Wales has had those outbreaks of community transmission, which fortunately we've been able to deal with in varying degrees of success, that's the original source. The first one was the original source from the Melbourne system, and of course the second outbreak of Northern Beaches we knew came from our quarantine system. So that risk will always be there, and it's not a question of if but when the next outbreak will be, but it's how you deal with it.
Okay.
And the only other option is not to accept any Aussies coming back home, which I don't think anybody is suggesting.
No, and okay, let's talk about your other colleagues. You speak, of course, about people like Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, West Australian leader Mark McGowan. They are calling for the Prime Minister to step up, for the federal government to come in and assume much greater responsibility for quarantine. Let's not forget, it is a constitutional responsibility of the Commonwealth. Do you think it's time for the federal government to put more in on that front?
Well, I'm not quite sure what they're asking for. In terms of, operationally, the systems are already up and running. We have some federal agencies supporting the New South Wales efforts, whether it's Border Force or the ADF, support what we're doing in the system. I don't understand what they mean by increasing the support. Of course, financially that would be useful, but operationally the systems are already there, and it's joint efforts. I mean, the New South Wales Police Force is in charge of our quarantine system, and they have been from day one in New South Wales, but they've worked very closely with health, with the ADF, with Border Force, with the local cleaning staff, the hotels themselves. It is a mammoth effort involving thousands of people, and I think to disrupt that system now would be detrimental. It wouldn't be useful. You don't want to disrupt the operations.
What do you think about the prospect of moving quarantine sites out of hotels, out of the big cities, like more Howard Springs type locations, which would be where the federal government would step up?
Yeah, I mean, Howard Springs is an exceptional location which is set up for that. But I think it brings enormous risk.
There are other potential locations like Howard Springs.
No, but I think the challenge is no matter where you have the system, the risk doesn't change. You have thousands of workers involved. You have to find the workers to support the system. You have to transport people to the system, and often people with the virus are more contagious in a closed environment like a bus or a taxi or an Uber than they are in a hotel room. So these are all the challenges that would exist with that system. We have to accept that no matter where the quarantine system is, that risk doesn't go away. It doesn't solve the problem. What we do need to consider is if there are any opportunities for us to improve the system, to make it tighter, of course we should do that, and New South Wales has taken that opportunity during the pause of reducing the number of Aussies coming back through Sydney Airport to reevaluate toward it, to make sure there isn't anything further we can do to make the system tighter, and we have tweaked it and made some changes in a positive way. But no matter where you have the system, the risk doesn't go away. The virus doesn't become less contagious depending on a regional location or otherwise. In fact, it could increase it.
A major issue. Just about out of time, Premier. A bit of good news yesterday. The government has secured those 10 million extra doses of the Pfizer vaccine. Greg Hunt has tweeted out the news from his government account announcing this spend of taxpayers' money with a Liberal Party logo firmly implanted in the top corner of that. That is not okay, is it?
Oh, look, I'm aware of that. But what I do know is that the Federal Health Minister and the Prime Minister have done an outstanding job.
Yeah, I know that, but I just want to get you to the ethics of attaching a party political logo
well, I can't
to
comment on something. I can't comment on something I haven't seen, but I have complete confidence in the integrity of all those who've acquired the vaccine, who are making sure the public is aware of it as well. And that's what matters to me. And I want to thank Minister Hunt and the Prime Minister, and I should say the committee they've got headed up by Dr Brendan Murphy, who's advising the government on the vaccine rollout.
Okay.
To have acquired that supply is really critical.
It's great and warmly welcomed by so many Australians. Okay, you may not have seen it, we've just shown our viewers, but would you, as a political leader, as a government leader, attach a political logo to a taxpayer-funded announcement?
Oh, look, I'm not going to comment on something I haven't seen.
But it's a simple question, yes or no? It goes to your standards, I guess, as a leader.
Michael,
would you do that?
There are lots of important life and death issues facing our community today. I'm not going to be drawn into that one. Thank you.
OK, we'll leave it there. Premier, thank you.
Thank you.
It is very complex what we're going to do with the quarantine and the international arrivals, but she is clearly saying that she's not up for having loads more coming into New South Wales.
Yeah.
Listening to that interview was David Speers, Insider's host. What did you... Michael gave her plenty of opportunity to say that she would agree to lifting the cap, but she kept saying, turning to her state colleagues.
Yeah, a couple of notable things from that interview. I think Gladys Berejiklian just doesn't want to comment about the Liberal Party slogan being branded on that Pfizer.
OK, well, before we get into the broader conversation, what do you think of that?
It's silly. Why do they do that, honestly?
Can we bring it up again, just so people can see it, the tweet from the Health Minister? Have we got it there?
I mean, first point, is it really going to make people think, gee, now I'm going to vote Liberal because of this? I mean, clearly this is government, taxpayers, as you say, taxpayers' money being put behind this. Politicising this sort of thing, right? Our vaccine program and during this pandemic. As I say, it's just silly. It's unnecessary. It's
and they copped a rightful bollocking for doing it in the bushfire crisis, and that prompted, from memory, I need to be corrected, Patas, on this, but they withdrew. There was a Liberal Party...
Right. I'd be surprised if that makes it to lunchtime, but we'll see. Look, just back on the hotel quarantine, though. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, Gladys Berejiklian, we are seeing, now we're into the second year of this pandemic. The tensions are still there, if not increasing, between states over how to deal with the intake. She would like a proportionate, based on the population size, the number of people you take in. New South Wales has been doing the heavy lifting, right, from the start.
Well, it's because so many of the international flights come into New South Wales.
Correct, but also other states at various points during last year. Victoria, most notably, stopped taking international flights, for understandable reasons. But New South Wales has been doing the heavy lifting. I think she makes a good point about, the risk is going to be there even if you set up remote camps, regional centre quarantine. The Prime Minister has been making a similar point. But I detect, if anything, there is gathering momentum to do this. because, well, a couple of reasons. I mean, yes, the Prime Minister's right that we've had 211,000 people come in through hotel quarantine and only a handful have leaked out into the community, right? But
we didn't have the severe UK strain.
This is the thing, a few things. These more virulent strains are clearly a greater concern when it comes to transmission, and some of the stories we've seen just in recent weeks. The frequency with which we're seeing these leakages from hotel quarantine do appear to be growing. It only takes one case to get out to cause severe community anxiety, lockdown in some states, economic cost as well. So, and not to mention the very real risk, if it can't be contained, of a whole new wave breaking out in the community. So it only takes one case for it to be a problem. And as I say, it does seem to be happening with greater frequency. They're talking about the Toowoomba option today. I've been through that airport a few times. It's a big, shiny, new, privately owned airport. The owners, the Wagner family, reckon they can knock up some accommodation there pretty quickly. I think, like with anything in this pandemic, we've just got to follow the scientific advice. If the experts say, for whatever reason, a regional centre like this that can be contained is better at preventing airborne spread of the disease, the virus, if that's the better way to go, we should do it. Presumably that's what they'll discuss today.
Now, the Prime Minister has finally had that phone chat with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
It took a while, but it's happened. What came from it?
Look, they talked about the alliance being the anchor of stability in the Indo-Pacific region. They talked about China, even if their readouts and public comments don't go to that much, but clearly that was discussed. Climate change as well. It is a bit hard to know how overt I think President Biden is going to be and has been already with Scott Morrison. Look, I doubt he'd say directly, you need to adopt this target on reducing
That's
emissions.
What he's got John Kerry for.
I don't
Spread that message below that.
I don't think any US president's going to be quite that overt, but everyone knows where Joe Biden wants to go. He wants the world to lift its ambition, and that would include Australia. And I don't think it's any mistake that since he's become president, Scott Morrison has really shifted things up a gear in terms of his rhetoric around reaching net zero, even saying this week his preference is for that to happen by 2050. He's got to drag his party with him, but everyone can see now where he's going. And Biden's having a climate summit in April. Scott Morrison sounded yesterday like he was expecting an invitation. He wants to be there, and I think he may have to take to that summit this commitment of net zero by 2050.
Right. You're a man in hot demand this morning, so let's skip to wooden spoon.
Well, it's got to be Craig Kelly.
Got to be.
Look, I know that the Prime Minister's handling of this issue wasn't great, but it's got to be Craig Kelly who cops the wooden spoon himself. I mean, the stuff, and you guys have been covering this for weeks, the stuff that he's been promoting about unproven treatments, COVID, doing a podcast with the anti-vaxxer, Pete Evans, and then the theatrics in the corridors of Parliament with Tanya Plibersek. Now he's even apparently flirting with the idea of defecting to the Nats. I can't see it happening. I don't know how many Nats voters there are in the Sydney seat of Hughes anyway, but even the very idea would be explosive between the coalition partners.
Oh dear.
We're going to let you go. I can see your phone is already ringing off the hook.
Next stop, who you got on Sunday?
Richard Marles, the Deputy Labor leader.
All right, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, guys.